L'kutei Sichos Chelek Chavtes Tavo Sicha Aleph Lili Nishmas Reb Yosef ben Yamin ben Reb Menashe Kaltman. When the Bikurim were brought, they were brought in a vessel, in a basket, in a container of some sort. The container actually, or the basket, plays a very important role in the mitzvah of Bikurim. We will see this in the Rambam, we will see this in the perspective of Chassidus, and we will gain a new understanding in the mitzvah of Bikurim. So we're going to begin with the Rambam. Okay? With regards to the mitzvah of Bikurim, which of course is the mitzvah of bringing the first fruits to the Beis HaMikdash to give it to the Kohen, which, as the Rambam says in Halacha Zayin, this is from Hilchas Bikurim, Perek Gimel. In Halacha Zayin, the Rambam begins with the words Ha Bikurim Tu'unin Keli, that the Bikurim must be brought in a container; they should be brought in something, and the Rambam then goes into some details about the container or the keli. Then in the next halacha ches, Dr. Rambam Hiviam B'Kli Matchis. If he brought the bikurim in a metal container, then the kohen gets the bikurim, and the container goes back to the owner. And if he brought it in a wicker basket or a basket made of reeds, a simple cheap basket, both the fruit and the baskets go to the Kohanim. That's what the Rambam says, that you have to have a keli. If the keli is metal, then the keli goes back to the owner. If the keli is wicker or straw or something like that, then the Kohen keeps the basket together with the bikurim. Darfen verstehen. So the Rebbe is going to ask, we have to understand the shita of the Rambam. What is the Rambam telling us, and what is the background? And in order to understand the question, the Rebbe introduces the makar, the source of the Rambam. So let's begin. Der makar from dem din is mefarshim zeichnen on the Mishnah in Bikurim. There is the Mishnah in Bikurim that says like this: Ha'ashirim meviim bikureim b'chalseis shel kesef v'shel zav. The wealthy would bring their bikurim in baskets of gold and silver. Va'aniyim meviim oisam b'salei netzarim shel arava klufa. The poor would bring them in baskets made of the reeds or the arava, the willows that are peeled. Again, similar to straw, wicker, a simple basket. And in the case of the poor who are bringing these cheap baskets, both the baskets and the bikurim are given to the kohen. That's a Mishnah in Bikurim. Then there's a Gemara in Baba Kama. From the Mishnah learned the Gemara Arois. Over there in the Gemara, on Baba Kama, Dav Tzadik Beis, Amud Aleph, the Gemara asks numerous times, what's the source to this people's expression, so and such expressions? One of those expressions is Basar Aniya Azla Aniyusa, which literally means poverty follows the poor. In more modern English, one would say the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So how do you know this? So the Gemara then references our Mishnah in Bikurim, Ashirim v'chulu, the rich are bringing their Bikurim in gold or silver baskets, v'aniyim v'chulu, the poor are bringing their Bikurim in wicker baskets, Hasalim v'abikurim neisnak lakenim. In the case of the poor, you're giving both the baskets and the Bikurim to the Kohanim, as the Rebbe will elaborate in the next paragraph, but the point of the Gemara is that the rich get to keep their baskets. The poor, not only they're poor, they also don't get to keep their baskets. So the rich make out better because they can take their baskets home. The poor can't. The poor leave their baskets with the kohanim. So the poor are even poorer than they were when they started, whereas the rich didn't lose anything. From them is bashas v'pashtus. From this we understand as a chilik zwischen kalsei shel zav and salei netzarim. Then zechin das anoisen. Why? Why are the rich taking back their baskets and the poor not? So we seemingly the difference is what was the intent of the giver. Since on the regular, the wealthy would bring their bikurim in expensive containers. The givers had no intent to donate or to give away their containers. They were very expensive. They want to hold on to them. As Rashi says on that Gemara in Baba Kama, that the rich did not give their baskets to the kohen. The pasha slips their tire seemingly because they were very expensive. The Torah told them to give the first fruits. The Torah didn't tell me he has to bring a $10,000 basket or even a $1,000 basket and give it away to the kohen. And since they had no intent of giving it away, therefore it's theirs, they keep it. But the poor who cannot afford expensive containers, they end up using wicker baskets. They initially intend to give away the baskets. Why schlep cheap baskets all the way back to where they came from? If they're giving it in the baskets, they say the kohen might as well keep it. And therefore the baskets belong to the Kohanim. And according to this approach, it makes a lot of sense that the Gemara can then later learn from this that the poverty follows the poor. That because he's poor, he's bringing the bikurim in cheap baskets. Is asli aniyusa. So after this follows poverty. That the baskets also remain in the kohen's possession. So that's the Gemara. The Gemara holds that it goes according to the intent of the giver. The rich had expensive baskets; they had no intention of giving it away, and therefore they got to keep it. The poor can't afford expensive baskets, so they give cheap baskets. Since they're giving cheap baskets, they have no reason not to give it to the kohen. So their intention is to give it to the kohen, and therefore the baskets are kept by the kohen. That's the Gemara, and that's what it means. Basar aniya as the aniyusa. That since the ani is buying a cheap basket, therefore the kohen gets to keep it. The Rambam is madgish the mechilik since the klimatchas and klerava. The Rambam, you don't see him mention rich or poor. The Rambam differentiates between metal containers and arava and willow containers. Nicht der Meinung Unterschied zwischen Asher und Ani ist der von Mashma, als Ladas Rambam ist das nicht toll in das Nesen, was wenn sich in der Teilkeit oder der Billigkeit von der Kelim. Obviously, according to the Rambam, it's not about the intent of the giver, which would depend on the expensiveness or the cheapness of the actual container. Ubifrat, as klimatches kann ich sein als was hat nicht kein Gleiche Shavje. The Rambam didn't even say gold and silver. The Rambam said metal. Metal could be expensive, metal could be cheap. An aluminum pan, which is a form of matches, is a very cheap container. Which means to say that Rambam specifically chooses a kind of container that's not specifically expensive. It's just more permanent than the wicker basket. So clearly the Rambam is not talking about the priciness of the container, and therefore it's not about the usher or the ani, the rich or the poor. No, the chilik is verbunden mit dem Suga klik shel atzmai. The differentiation is, the distinction is the material of the container. See, this is a klimatchis, so the kliyarav of a chelef. Is it a metal container or is it a wicker container? And if the Rambam says that this is not about poverty, this is not about richness or wealth, so then adas was the Gemara zogt the mocker zum klal the amri inchi basar aniya. So then how does the Gemara learn from this the rule that poverty follows the poor if this isn't even about poor? From the Mishnah in Bikurim Ashirim Evim v'chulu. Meint es nit der Far was by klishel oni is das an neusens to geben the klitzum kain. It doesn't mean to say that the Gemara doesn't, according to the Rambam, the Gemara doesn't mean that the intent of the poor, of the rich is to give it, and the intent of the poor is to not give it. Nor from the Mesuv from the Halacha. It's not about the intent, it's more about the outcome. An oni kiragal bring the klein etzarim, and as I'm included that 5 months since a person generally would bring. In other words, according to the Gemara, the whole din is based on das an neisen. So the idea is that the poor get poorer, meaning to say that the poor melachatchila have a defected approach. It's just going to make them poorer. Their das hanoisen to give it away because it's so cheap causes them to lose the keli. The Rambam can't say that it's about das hanoisen because the Rambam doesn't mention the ashir, the ani. So it must be that the way the Rambam would learn the Gemara is that since in the end of the day the poor give cheap baskets, and the halacha is that a cheaper keli remains by the kohen. We'll see later in the sikha why. Therefore, the automatically you see the ani lose out. It's not about his intent; it's about the outcome of his actions. So besides the fact that the pshat in the Gemara Abazer Aniya Azli Aniyusa is not so clear, it makes much more sense according to the way the Gemara learns it that it's about Das HaNoisen. The whole idea of the poor following the poverty following the poor is to say that there's something missing in the poor person in his approach. Here, it's not his fault; it's the halacha. So the way that Rambam would have to learn the Gemara is already not as geschmack as the way we understood it at first. In addition to that, what taka is the pshat in the Rambam, where the Rambam does not, if the mocker of the Rambam is the Gemara, why does the Rambam change from the Gemara and focus on the material of the keli instead of focusing on the person giving it? Before we get to the beer, the Rebbe is going to suggest in Sif Beis that maybe the Rambam is following the Shita of the Sifri, and the Rebbe is going to show that can be. The pasuk says that the kohen should take the basket from your hand. The Sifri says, Mikan Amru, from there here they say, the wealthy bring their bikurim in baskets of gold and silver. The poor bring it in wicker baskets or reed baskets. And the baskets of the poor are given to the kohanim in order to give another matana, an additional gift to the kohanim. Learn the Mefarshim. The Purus believe it as Sifri. The Mefarshim explain what is the Sifri saying. From the word hatena was the word hatena means a basket. The whole word is the point here really is that he's taking the bikurim from the person. That's the context of the pasuk. The fact that the pasuk adds in the word the basket. Let him up as the din v'lokachakein and sved zayna is dafka kishu tenas alba alma. From this we learn that when can the kohen keep it? Only if it's a tena, a very simple basket. But if it's a more permanent, more expensive container, then the kohen doesn't keep it. And the reason is in order to give something beautiful to the kohanim. So one way you could touch it, and very simple, is that you're giving an additional matana, as we'll see later. The Tosas Yom Tov says we're enhancing the matana. He says the bikurim paid is from the anim zanima'at, since the amount of fruit that the poor give is also minimal. The riberot the mesakin give, and therefore it was instituted as an on that the poor person should also give the basket. Together with the basket, it's a more dignified present. So this is the Sifri. The Sifri learns that from the Lakach Hatena that you should give away the basket, and the reason is Liskais Matana L'Koyanim, in order that what the Koyanim gets would be something more dignified. Says aber moving at the Kenaz in it Lenin das Rambam. This can't be the Pshat in the Rambam. Van on the Fies is doch das Tali Bikir nicht in der Kli in welchem bringt die Bikurim in Kamus Aperis was bringt like Bikurim. Then it's not about the material of the container; it's about the quantity of the fruit in it. Und das wenn sich wieder in dem Chilik zwischen Nashirim and Anim, which again would depend on the difference between rich and poor. So even the Sifri, you have to be mechalik, you have to differentiate between rich and poor. That the rich don't have to give the basket because there's no need to give a fancier something beyond the fruit because there's so much fruit, and the poor have to give the basket in order to make the gift more beautiful. But says the Rambam is not mechalik and bin sukia kelim atzmam. But the Rambam again only differentiates between two different types of kelim. And the Rambam does not focus on the rich and the poor and the amount of fruit that find themselves that in the basket. So again, so you have the Gemara, you have the Sifri. The Rambam is saying something different. The Rambam is focusing specifically on the material of the keli. Is it matchis? Is it wicker? Is it metal? Is it wicker? Or reeds, etc. And that's it. And doesn't go into rich and poor, the amount of fruit, the larger amount, smaller amount. So what is the shita of the Rambam? So this is what the Rebbe is going to explain to us today. What does the Rambam hold? And in order to get into this, in order to understand the Rambam, we first have to understand what is this whole concept of giving the keli. Everyone knows the idea of bikurim, that the mitzvah of bikurim, that Hashem commanded us, that when we live in Eretz Yisrael, the first fruits that grow on the tree should be marked, a sign should be made on them, you hang a red string, and then when they're ready, you bring them with a lot of pomp and fanfare to the Beis HaMikdash, and you give it to the Kohen as a gift to Hashem, the gift to the Kohen. Now, there's a but there's a halacha, habikurim to unin keli, that it has to be brought in a container, in a vessel. What is the meaning of this? What is the significance of this? And how connected is this to the mitzvah of bikurim? How necessary is it? So the Rebbe is going to present three approaches based on the three opinions that we have learned up until here. And then the Rebbe is going to say that the Rambam is on a whole nother level. But let's take one level at a time. The concept, the definition of the obligation to give the basket, and again we're talking about the wicker basket, but to give a basket to the Kohanim together with the Bikurim could be learned on a number of different ways, umehem, and amongst them. Aleph, number one. The shaykhis von the salim and the Bikurim is nor behava asam. The fact that you need to have a basket is only in the bringing of the bikurim. When you bring it to the kohen, to the Beis HaMikdash, it has to be in a basket. Aber der din wegzugeben die salim to the kohanim is a bechunder chiyuv nisina. The din that the Rambam says, ha-bikurim to unin keli, that you have to give, the Rambam says, that the basket is given to the kohen, that is a separate obligation, which is not related to the obligation of giving bikurim, which means, according to this approach, you would bring bikurim in a keli, that's part of the mitzvah, but then when you get to the Beis HaMikdash, now you have two mitzvahs. One mitzvah, two chiyuvim rather. One chiyuv is to give the bikurim to the kohen, and a separate chiyuv is to give the basket to the kohen. That's one way of looking at it. That it's only in the bringing of it, not in the giving of it. Base. Even by giving it, there is a connected. Aber die shaykhis is nor benegia dem chiyuv hanesina. As the chiyuv nesinas habikurim lekayin is guided ech nesinas asalim, but the connection in the giving only goes far as the obligation. There is an obligation to give the baskets as part of the obligation of giving the bikurim. Emphasis here is on the chiyuv of the obligation. Aber niti as the maisa nesinu from the salim is in zelben gedev and nesinas habikurim. But when you actually give it, you can't say it's the same thing. It's not exactly the same thing. Where the obligation on the person to give the basket is part of the obligation of giving bikurim, but the actual giving of it is very two separate things. You give the bikurim and you give the basket is two separate things. So the connection is in the chiyuv, not in the maisa hanesina. Givul oder nachmar. Let's take it a step further. A third approach. As the shaykhis is nit nor in the chiyuv hanesina, nor echen maisa hanesina. That also in the act of giving it, also there's a connection to bikurim with the salam davon gegeben geworden b'chad ha'machte in the maisa hanesina. The bikurim and the basket must be given in one shot, in one act of giving. So number one, in the giving itself, there's no connection. It's only in the bringing. Number two, in the giving, there's a connection, but only as far as the obligation goes, not as far as the act of the giving. Number three, even in the act of giving, they are connected and it should be done together. Before we go to see how we see this in the various different opinions, let's first understand what is the practical relevance of these three opinions. There is a halachic relevance, halachic difference between these different approaches. According to the first opinion, or first approach rather, that the connection is only with regards to the bringing. But when it comes to the giving, they're not connected. It's two totally separate things. So you have an obligation to give the basket to a kohen, but it doesn't have to be the same kohen, because it's two separate obligations. I have one obligation to give fruit, another obligation to give a basket. So I choose to give the basket to another person, to another kohen, even a kohen from a different shift, from a different week, I'm allowed to, because it's not the same. It's not the same act. It's not the same obligation. According to the second approach, that the obligation to give the baskets is an outcome of, is ancillary to the obligation of giving the bikurim, is mistaber to the Keren Shabbat Mishmar. It would make sense that at least it has to be to a kohen that's in the same shift, in the same week. As if the bikurim atzman, just like since the chiyuvim, the obligations are linked. So therefore, just like the bikurim have to be given to a kohen of that mishmar, so to the basket has to be given to a kohen of that mishmar. But it doesn't mean that I have to give it to the same kohen that's getting the bikurim, because even though they're linked, still in the act of giving, they're not connected. It's two different acts of giving, and therefore I do have to give it to a kohen of that mishmar, but not necessarily to the same kohen that's getting the bikurim. But on the third approach, as the shaykhus is in them, as darvtan ein ma'isa and sinner, that it's connected in the fact that it has to be one act of giving, is pashut that that's very gegeben to them selben kohen of ma'isa mit the bikurim. We said it has to be b'chadam achta in one shot. So clearly you have to give the basket and the fruit to the same kohen at the same time. So the Rebbe is bringing in these three different approaches to show that it's not just three random ways of looking at it, but they actually have a practical relevance. If you say it's two separate things, the giving of the basket and the giving of the bikurim, then you can give it to any kohen that you want. If you're saying that they're linked in their obligation, even if they're not linked in the act of giving, then there has to be a similarity. And just like the bikurim is going to a kohen in this mishmar, so to the basket has to go to a kohen of this mishmar. But if you say that the act of giving becomes one act, then it has to be given at the same time to the same kohen. So these are the three approaches that we have in the Geder, in the idea of the fact that there is an obligation to give baskets to the kohen. Now in Sif Daled, the Rebbe is going to link these three opinions with the three opinions that we brought up until here, besides for the Rambam. The Gemara, the Sifri as you would learn it simply, and the Sifri as it is learned by the Teisas Yom Tov. As in dem besteht der Chelek zwischen Drashas Sifri lefi muvana kipshutei, Drashas HaGemara in Baba Kamel lefi Pirush Rashi, und der Pirush HaTeisas Yom Tov Sifri. According to this, we could say this explains the different opinions of the Sifri on a literal level. The Gemara, according to Baba Kamel with Rashi, and the Teisas Yom Tov, how he learns the Sifri. Let's take one at a time. Aleph. Von dem was der Din, as die Salim geht man up zu der Kernem. Wert in Sifri Ogelen von Pasuk Velakach Keina Tenem Yadecha. The fact that the Sifri learns the din of giving the baskets to the kohen from a pasuk. Velakach Keina Tenem Yadecha. Outside din miyuchad af tenna, which is a unique din on the basket. Und euch davon, was Besium in Sifri steht, wie Salim Neusten Lakayanim. Also, in the phraseology of the Sifri, he uses the term the baskets go to the Kayanim. Und sagt nicht ne Lashna Ma'achtam wie Salim und Bikurim Netan Lakayanim. Al derech v'yim Mishnah. It doesn't say in a more inclusive manner that the baskets and the Bikurim go to the Kayan like the Mishnah says it. Is mashma, so we have 2 points over here. Number one, the fact that he has a limud miyuchad for it, a special pasuk for it. Number two, that when he says it goes to the kohen, he says the baskets by itself without including the bikurim. Is mashma the chiyuv to give the sound to the kohen to bezunder inyan b'nesina, nit in the bikurim. It implies, it makes us understand that the giving of the basket is not related to the giving of the bikurim. It's a separate giving. Und das ist Kavanas as Sifri b'siyum liskes matana l'kayanim. And when the Sifri says the words liskes matana l'kayanim, what does he mean? As is abazunder schos matana l'kayanim, that it's a separate gift. It's a separate privilege that the kayin gets. Was der ani hat mit dem was gitem tenet zum kayin. That the ani, the poor person, has a special schos that he's giving an additional matana to the kayin. So the Sifri follows the first way, that the mitzvah of the keli, as connected to Bikurim, is in the bringing. When it comes to the giving, it happens to be, I'm sorry to interrupt, it happens to be that in the second sikha that we're learning this week, about the Chayis and Elul, the two Lashonis is bringt a Chayis and Elul, or git a Chayis and Elul, which is brings and gives. And here we're discussing the Hava and the Nesina, the bringing and the giving. So it's just fascinating how there's always a link between the different halakim of Torah. But anyway, without getting distracted, in the nesina, in the actual giving of the basket, it's not connected to the giving of the bikurim, and therefore it has its own limud. Therefore, the Sifri says salim and not salim bikurim, and therefore it says liskes matana l'kayin, that the ani has the schus of giving another matana to the kayin. Base. Then there's the second approach. And here it's very interesting. In the Gemara Baba Kama, with the Mishnah about Gebrach was Makar of them was Amri Inchi Bosser Aniya Azli Aniyusa. The Gemara uses this Mishnah as a source to the idea of poverty following the poor. Is Muchach von dem was Rashi Bavaran dort b'Pirushay v'Ashirim le'Yonishin Kalsasein le'Kernim. From the fact that Rashi clarifies that the rich did not give their baskets to the kayin, as it's clear, it's obvious, as the nesinas asalim from the aniyim zum kayin hat a shaychis mit the aniyus diker nesina from bikurim. So that means that the reason why the basket is going to the kayin is because the bikurim was a cheap bikurim. Umizeh as a giben avek the salim benoisiv to nesinas bikurim, which implies that the baskets is separate from the bikurim. Sorry, that the salim are in addition to the bikurim, meaning to say they're connected. Aber meidach is der beini talking nechacha zu zogin as the salim zon haben a shayches to the bikurim atzmam ad kedei kacha zer nesin zon darfen sein a maisa echad. There has to be a connection. Because the whole reason you're giving the basket is because the gift that came was a poor gift. So therefore you're giving the basket as well. So therefore, clearly the basket is connected to the bikurim. But there's no proof to say that it's totally connected. The Adirabbe, as Voltnita Zay Masingim and the Loshon Azli Aniyusa, if the Salim Volten Given a Chelek Hanesina from the bikurim. The term Azli, that one follows the other, implies that they're not totally the same thing. One comes after the next. So on the one hand, there seems to be a connection because we're saying that the reason why he's giving the basket is because he's poor, implying that there's something has something to do with the bikurim. So there is a connection there. We can't say that it's totally two separate things, but there's not enough proof to say that it becomes one thing, especially since the Gemara chooses the term azli. So that's the second approach. The second approach is that it's connected in the chiyuv, but not in the ma'isa. And that is seen in the Gemara Baba Kama. Like in Pirush HaTeisos Yom Tov v'chulu. In Sifri, Sha'aniyim eviyim ati masal yenech shematana. Teisos Yom Tov, which we brought earlier, that the reason that the kohen is keeping the basket is to enhance the gift of the fruit, which is a very small gift in the case of the poor. V'hainu as the salas as evi mashlim the bikurim is his own dai nech shematana, that the basket is completing the bikurim, that it should be considered a dignified gift. Is mistaber to zogin as nesinas asalim davzayin b'nesina matana achas mit bikurim. It makes sense to say that it should be one gift. That the bikurim should be a beautiful gift together with a basket. So the Teisos Yom Tov, the way the Teisos Yom Tov learns the Sifri, would be consistent with a third approach. So we have three approaches. Number one, the approach of the Sifri, that when it comes to the giving of the basket, it's a totally separate thing from the giving of the bikurim. The approach of the Gemara, that they're linked, they're connected, but with regards to the fact that they both share an obligation, but when it comes to the Maisa and the sin of the act of the giving, it's two totally separate acts. Then you have the Teisas Yom Tov, the way that it understands the Sifri, that it's one act of giving. Okay. So at least now we understand the three different approaches in the Geder, in the definition of the fact that a basket has to be given to the Kohen. Now we're going to introduce the opinion of the Rambam, the Shita of the Rambam, and as I said before, the Rebbe is going to introduce, the Rambam has a whole other Shita. Shleimar, as the Rambam learned in the Rambam is a fourth way. Which is a much greater chiddush than the previous mentioned approaches. Not only that even in the act of giving are the basket and the bikurim connected, nor ein zach in the bikurim, it becomes one thing. It becomes one. In the bikurim of asa bikurim, it's all in the bringing of the bikurim, the giving of the basket and the giving of the basket becomes one thing. Not only is it two things that are connected in the act of giving, they become one thing. Then is the shleimus habikurim eshakim mitzvah avos bikurim. When have you completely fulfilled the mitzvah of bikurim? B'shas tiperes werden gebracht in a kli, und die kli wird wie a tel von the bikurim, when you bring it in a container, and the container becomes part of the bikurim. Besignin acher, to say this in other words, the shayches is nit nor in dem peil. It's not only with regards to the person, that the person who's bringing it has an obligation to bring also the basket. To give the basket. Pu'ula, not only is it in the act of giving, poil is the second way, that's the chiyuv, the obligation on the person. Pu'ula is the third way, that in the act of giving they're connected. They're oichin dem nifal, also in the outcome, the result of the gift, as vert ein zach, that the bikurim and the sal and the baskets become one thing. Und das macht der Rambam klar. Mit dem, was stellt die Halacha wie im Beklimatchis, behemshich zu der Friedrich Halacha bikurim tun und keli. And the Rambam makes sure that you know this by juxtaposing these two halachas. Halacha Zayin, which is that the bikurim need a keli, and halacha Ches, that if you brought it in metal containers, then the kohen, it goes back to the kohen. If you brought it in wicker baskets, the kohen keeps it. Nicht wie in der Mishnah, wo das wird gebracht als a besonder din v'halacha in dem Eifen Hava von Ashin v'Aniyim, not like in the Mishnah where it's brought as a separate halacha. Rather, the Rambam brings the two things together. Das heißt, as die Kli is verbunden und wird ein Sach mit die Bikurim. That when we say that a Bikurim tunen keli, it means that the Bikurim becomes part and one thing with this basket. Und then dem din is the talking Chelek zwischen den so Kli und zweiten. And there's no difference between the material of the keli. Any type of keli, any type of container that the Bikurim comes in, becomes part of the Bikurim and is given to the Kohen as part of the Bikurim as one thing. Und das, was der Rambam is mechalek zwischen klimatos and kliarov v'chelev. So then, why does the Rambam say that by metal it goes back? Is norder far was by klimatchis is da din miyuchad, because klimatchis has a separate din. That you'll see in a second. That after the kohen, it was given to the kohen as part of the bikurim, it then has to go back to the kohen. And this is the Rambam specifies it goes back, is returned to the owner. It not like we'll see, like others say, la koyanim or la bailim, that the bailim keep it. It goes to the kohen, and then the kohen gives it back to the owner. This says mitzad the bikurim and mitzvah of awesome very clear klimatcha sedach with the bikurim. Mitzad the bikurim and the mitzvah of bringing them the keli, the container, even a metal container becomes one thing with the bikurim. And this is the only way to fulfill and to accomplish the mitzvah of bringing bikurim to the mikdash. Says nervous nach them after it was given to the kohen, it's chayzer aklila ba'alav, it's returned to the bailim as vert nit mam and kohen. It doesn't become the possession of the kohen. Whereas by the wicker baskets or the cheaper baskets, it is not returned to the owner. The kli bleibt ein zach mit the bikurim expeter. The container continues to remain one thing with the bikurim. When the time I have why taka? If the whole idea of the Rambam is to become one thing, then why taka do you have to give back the metal containers? So the Rabbi explains, Yesh Lema. By kli matchis, the shaychus b'neim is no mitzadem dina bikurim turin kli. When it comes to the metal keli, the only connection between the container and the bikurim is the fact that there's a din that says so. The riber is echter verbund von der keli mit die pedes von bikurim nor benegele kiyam mitzvah. Therefore, the connection continues only as long as the mitzvah is being done. Havas bikurim beis Hashem lekecha, bringing the bikurim to the Eibishter's home. Or bakli arav v'chele v'keitzben was eich b'mitzius nativis. But by the wicker basket, they're connected. A, they're both made out of things that grow on the ground, and B, also in value, because they're inexpensive, so they don't stand out on their own. They're considered ancillary to something else. Idas ahani zum geder a klishe bahem. Bikurim tunin keli. So therefore, this assists the concept of the keli as the zvert legamri v'yenzach with the peris, that it becomes one thing with the fruit. Alderech with the klipa from the peris bikurim atzman, just like the fruit have peels, and you don't say, oh, the peels are something separate because they are totally part of the fruit. So to the basket is like the peels of the fruit. It's not something that stands out in value. It's not something that stands out because of a different material. So therefore, it retains its identity as being part of Bikurim. Whereas the Kli Matchis, because they're so different, so therefore it only lasts as long as the Keli, as long as the mitzvah is being done. Which leads us to conclude. Obviously, klimatris includes klekesef ezov. So by the Gemara is looking at das hanoisen, the intent of the giver. The Rambam is not looking at das hanoisen because the Rambam holds that regardless of the das hanoisen, the bikurim, the salim, the baskets, the containers are part of the mitzvah all the way to the very end. It's just that once the mitzvah is done, if something is a klematchis, if something is made out of metal, so it's so different than the bikurim themselves. Once you're done and over with the mitzvah, and the kohen has the bikurim, then the connection gets lost, and therefore the kohen has to return the kli to the owner, not that it reverts back to the owner automatically, but chayzer akli leba'alav, it has to be returned to the bailim because temporarily it was owned by the kohen. In Sivav, the Rabbi is going to show us various different nuances in the Rambam that support this approach, this understanding of the Rambam, that the Rambam holds that the difference between that the connection between the keli and the bikurim goes all the way through, that it becomes one thing, and the fact that the difference is about the matchis, about the material of the keli, not about the rich or the poor or the intent of the giver. This will actually explain and make more gishmak a number of different differences or nuances in the words of the Rambam. Aleph number one, and his mashmed yad goshavek and them gavram maybe he doesn't emphasize at all who the person is who's bringing the bikurim ashevani, whether he's rich or poor. He only speaks about the bringing as it pertains to the object of the bikurim. Heviyam, he brought them bikli matchis in metal and containers, or heviyam bikli rava v'chelev, he brought them in wicker containers, reed containers. This doesn't even have to be explained because this we elaborated on at length. The Rambam holds it's not about the rich or the poor. It's not about the what the intent of the giver was. It's more about the fact that there is a mitzvah of bringing bikurim in a keli, and regardless of what the material is, it becomes part of the bikurim. Beis, another another change that Rama makes, says Meshana u'masmid meloshna Mishnah u'neich von Sifriya Gemara v'asalim v'abikurim noisnim nitanim lakayanim. The Rambam takes out the word noisnin or nitanim, depending on the girsa. But either way, the fact that the noisnin, the fact that it's being given to the kayanim, the Rambam takes out the word noisnim. Zagendik harei habikurim v'asalim lakayanim. The bikurim and the salim are to the kayanim. The connection is not limited to the giving it to the kohen, which would be like one of the earlier approaches, that when you give it to the kohen, there's a link between them. It's not nitanim lakayanim, it's lakayanim. Both the baskets and the bikurim belong to the kohen together as one thing. So the emphasis here is the fact that the Rambam takes out the word noisnin. It's not that that the connection is in the giving. The connection is much deeper than that. Gimel, it is mahapich dem seder. The Rambam changes the order of Yishtein in their Mishnah. Hasalim va'bikurim. Mishnah says first the baskets and then the fruit. When schreibt bikurim va'salim, the Rambam writes first the bikurim and then the baskets. Afal pi as hasalim is the chiddush, even though the chiddush here is the baskets. Now with bikurim that they go to the kohen, we know the chiddush is that by the poor, even the baskets go to the kohenim. So it should have said the chiddush first, hasalim va'bikurim, like in the Mishnah. The Rambam changes the order, says bikurim first. Why? Well, the lashon hasalim va'bikurim. If it says baskets first, as that the baskets are being said first because they're separate from the bikurim. Und der Pfarrer schreibt der Rambam bikurim v'asalim, was der Mittes Mudgis of the salim that nimshach und korach v'yaprat von the bikurim. Therefore, the Rambam says the bikurim and the salim, implying that the baskets are a sub detail within the bikurim, which is the whole shita of the Rambam, that the salim become part of the chiyuv of the bikurim and they become one thing. So therefore he says a salim. Bikurim first, to emphasize that the salim is part of the bikurim. Dalit, and the fourth point where we see this shit in the Rambam, it is Messiah the halacha. The Rambam concludes, if the bikurim became tamei, then the baskets don't go to the kohen. This is consistent and connected to the fact that the baskets become one with the bikurim, which is why the baskets are dependent on the state of the bikurim. If the bikurim are tamei, then just like the kohen is not getting the bikurim, then the kohen is not getting the baskets either. Because the baskets and the bikurim are connected, they're intertwined. So we see here, in addition to the fact that the Rambam juxtaposes the tu'unin bikurim tu'unin keli and the klimat alach of klimatches next to each other, in addition to the fact that the Rambam uses the term choizer hakli liba'olav, which we said earlier proves that the Rambam holds that it belongs to it's given to the kohen. One thing with the bikurim, and it's just that later the kohen has to return it. In addition to that, there's four more points. The fact that the Rambam doesn't mention the giver, he just mentions the fact that it's being brought. The fact that he doesn't mention the word noisnin, because it's not just about the nesina, it's about a much deeper connection. The fact that he says bikurim first and salim second, to imply that the salim are included with the bikurim. And number four, the fact that if the bikurim are tamei, these baskets don't go to the kohen because the baskets are dependent on the bikurim. So this is the answer. Adkan is the answer to our original question. What is the Shittas Rambam? So the Shittas Rambam, unlike the Shittas Gemara, is that when the Torah tells us to bring bikurim in a keli, it means not just to bring it. It means to bring it. It means to give it. And when you give it, they become one thing. And any keli, the bikurim and the salim, the baskets become one thing. It's just that if it's a metal keli, gold, silver, metal, whatever it is, something that's a little bit more different than the fruit, then after you're done and over with doing the mitzvah, then there's no more connecting point, and therefore the kohen has to give the basket back, the container back to the kohen. The kohen has to give the container back to the owner. Sif Zayin and on, the Rebbe is going to explain the idea of the basket, or the keli, the container of the bikurim, according to Pnimi Yisrael Yanim, according to Chassidus. Darf na verstehen die Sheiches mit Pnimi Yisrael Yanim Akoponim zwischen bikurim mit der keli befrat klira v'chelev. We have to understand what's the connection between the bikurim, the fruit, and the basket, the container, especially the cheaper baskets. And the Rebbe first is going to explain this question. Bikurim represents the top quality. First of all, on a very literal level, it had to be brought from the first. That Bikurim can only come from the 7 species that are said to praise Eretz Yisrael. And if you brought it from other types of fruit, an apple and orange, they don't become holy. And so too, on a spiritual level, it's only when the Beis Hamikdash was standing, and only in Eretz Yisrael, the land that the eyes of Hashem are constantly upon it. And then within these species alone, they have to be from the choicest of the fruit. You can't bring figs that are, dates that are in the mountains, not fruits that are in the valleys, and not olives that are not the best. You have to bring the tmorim that come from the valleys and the fruit that come from the mountains, because they are the choicest fruit. And if you did bring from the lesser quality fruits, then it doesn't become holy. So on the one hand, you say that on one hand, the Rabbi is showing us that Bikurim is about the top quality stuff, top shelf. You're bringing the best species, and in that species itself, the choicest or the best from that species, and it has to be brought dafke when there's a Beis Hamikdash, and dafke from fruits that were grown in Eretz Yisrael, because we're talking about the creme de la creme. But at the same time, you're telling me that the Bikurim should be in a container. As Kedushas Bikurim v'ki mitzvasam is verbunden mit akli v'agbala. That there is a limitation to it. It has to fit inside of a container, which already shows that it's something small. Und nochmal, von Siyam Allah Abraham, wem nicht nur Bikurim, was demol fällt in Schleimus Bikurim von was demol fällt in Schleimus Mitzvah von Bikurim, ist nicht dort die Anachal auf Nemesberg, ist ein Asal Lakerdim. Is move on as when the Salam bleiben Yeva de Kernim, just a Shleimu Mailim Bikurim. From the fact that it says that if the Bikurim became Tomei, and then you can't do the Bikurim properly, you can't put it down by the Mizbeach, the Kohanim don't get the baskets, implies that when the Kohanim do get the baskets, that is the most amazing way, the most perfect way of doing the mitzvah. But that's the Shaykh Kanal Davke by Klei Arav v'Chelef. And when does a Kohen keep the basket? When you're giving him a cheap basket, a wicker basket. It's like the junk of the vineyard and the junk of the olive field. So let's say this over in short. Wie kommt es? Als bei Bikurim was eine Kishma Bikurim die erste und die beste Misvach Haaretz. Was davon gebracht werden in the base of Hashem Lekechem. Bis lefnei Mizbech Hashem Lekechem. How could it be that Bikurim that as their name represents the best and the first that are being brought all the way till the Mizbeach? So the Shleim was ein verbunden Davke mit Keli. The perfection of it should be connected with limiting it into containing it, and more specifically in a wicker container, in a wicker basket. In other words, why are we taking something so amazing and putting it into something so simple and telling us that that's the best way of doing it? So the Rebbe explains. We know that the Bikurim represents Yidden. The Pasuk says, I saw your forefathers like the first fruit on the fig tree. This Mechzedek explains in Eratera as the Inyan from Bikurim weist auf Neshamas Yisrael. Bikurim represents the Neshamas of Yidden as they are in their source, in their root above. Which over there, the Yidden, the thought of Yidden precedes anything, precedes even Torah. And before we go to the next point, the Rebbe in the brackets makes a side point, so to speak. But the far is the din as Bikurim and Truma. That's what the din is that Bikurim come before Truma. Afal Pi as Beit decide Truma and side Bikurim is very ungeruf and Reishis, even though they both refer to as Reishis the first. Von deswegen seine Bikurim Truma. Nevertheless, the halacha is that Bikurim precede Truma. While the reishis from Truma, Oisius Torah Mem, the reishis, the word reishis that is written by Truma, which the word Truma is made up of the letters Torah Mem, is the Inyan Torah. So because the reishis of Truma represents Torah. But so Torah state Hashem Kanani reishis Darkei, Hashem acquired me at the beginning of his road, at the beginning of the road. So there is a concept of Torah as being reishis. So the reishis of Truma represents the reishis of Torah. Und the reishis from Bikurim is benamis Avidin. Whereas the reishis of Bikurim represents Yidden, which also with regards to Yidden it says that they are reishis. Just like Yidden came before the Torah, as is and Bikurim came to Truma. That's why Bikurim come before Truma. So there is a very important point to be made over here that Bikurim is a very lofty level. It represents the Yid as he is in Machshava Agduma, in the earliest Machshava of the Eibishter, that even precedes Torah, on a higher level than Torah. Now continues the Rebbe, even though the Neshama, as it is above, is higher than anything else, it's in such a strong connection with Hashem, to the point that he is pure, it is clean of any other negative or any other non-godly existence. Nevertheless, we started saying like this: the Bikurim represent the Machshava of Yidden, the Neshamas Yisrael, as they are all the Machshava, as they are the Machshava of the Eibishter. So even though it's on such a high level, nevertheless, the Neshama has to come down into a vessel. Neshama beguf into a body. Versus mag, in which the body limits the revelation, the revealed bond that it has with Eibishter. It conceals and it blocks the connection of the Neshama with godliness. So we have a similar concept. The Neshama is this highest, on the highest level. And where does it end up? In a guf. Is the Chabar Yodua? But we know this from learning Chassidus, as the Yiridik Delam Igram Labira Miktis Kedai, that this terrible descent from the highest rooftop to the lowest, to the deepest pit, is worthwhile. This is it's a descent which leads to an ascent. And because it goes down into the container that is the guf, because of that, this accomplishes in the neshama a great ascent. As that she ends up going higher than she was before she started out, when she was above. By going down into this world and working within the confines of the guf, this reveals in the neshama the true bikurim, the true quality. The fact that the neshama is one with the Eibishter. And just like as it is with regards to the journey of the neshama, the journey begins at a very high level and then goes down into a very low level into the guf. But it's for tzedek aliyah to discover the ultimate bikurim in the neshama, which is the fact that the bikurim is the neshama is one with the Eibishter. The same thing is true to the Avedis Adam. The tachas like Avan Avedis Adam, the Zechuis Bikir Nita in Iravedim in Ruchnim. The ultimate perfection of the person's Aveda is not so reflected in the spiritual Aveda of the Neshama, the love of Hashem, the fear of Hashem, etc. The Davke became Mitzvahs Maisius. Durch Mekayim sei Mitzvahs of Maisiv Peil. Was wird getan, Davke mit den Keach Architekten von Guf. As die ganze Metzias von Guf wird der Keli v'Chelik Shlotus Neshama. The ultimate perfection of the Neshama is in mitzvahs, which utilize the lowest part of the guf, the hands, the kayach ha'maisa, the tools for action that are in the guf, and that takes the whole guf and makes it part of the mission, part of the holiness of the neshama. And that's how you elevate the neshama. So much so that where will the ultimate revelation be? When Mashiach comes with the neshama as it is in a guf. Was the Tam deruf is, The Alter Rebbe is mevared in Tanya, the Gabi Kolos Elamis, and the reason for this is, as the Alter Rebbe explains, as Tachlis Shtalshos Elamis V'Yidosam Madrege L'Madrege, Einimis V'Elamis El Yenim Helev Lam Yiridim Erepanim Yisbaruch, and the Tachlis Elamis Atachten. Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya that the whole purpose of all of the worlds is not all the fact that there's so many different worlds lower than the next is not for the higher worlds, because the higher worlds are just a descent for the Eibishter. The Eibishter has no need for something that's lower than it, unless this Elam is Tachten. But says the Tachten, it's the lowest of the low. But over there, because that's where the Eibishter wants his dwelling place. And when this world becomes a dwelling place for Hashem, this elevates the entire creation, including those more spiritual worlds, which we just said that they weren't the purpose of creation. Just like before we said the worlds and the neshama, so too here the Rebbe explains on a world level there is the fact that the Eibusher created the world because he wants a dira b'tachtenim, and so too in the person of the neshama. As davke durch Yudas lematan lilma zatachten beklei aguf und sie führt durch die Kavana von Lasal zeberach dira b'tachtenim, was das ist davke durch die Bulle in der Lemazeh und dort guf im Beginnes zatachten shabei kiyam mitzvahs b'maisa, when the neshama comes out into this world and operates within the confines of the guf. That is how he could make a dira b'tachtenim, because then he is doing the mitzvahs with this world, with the koyach of Maisa, which is the lowest koyach of the person. This elevates and completes the holiness and the purity of the neshama and the guf together. Like we said, the baskets and the bikurim come together. Here the neshama and the guf come together. When them guf aliyah, and this is the aliyah of the neshama. But it's not that it's bringing the guf with it, and it's reaching its ultimate tara and kedusha. So in Tziv Ches, we were given a crash course in the whole concept of the creation of this world, the purpose of creation of this world, and the purpose of putting the neshama into a guf into this world. And the answer is because this is where the Eibishter's desire is. The Eibishter's desire is in a dira b'tachtenim, and the way it's done is dafka to neshama b'guf. And therefore, even though the neshama starts out on a very high level, nevertheless, the Eibishter puts the neshama inside of a guf, and that guf inside Elam Hazeh Tachten, because that is where the world and the neshama reach their ultimate perfection. Just like we said this with regards to the spiritual significance of Bikurim that it represents the Neshamas Yisrael, the way it comes out into this world, the same thing has to be in the actual fulfillment of the mitzvah. How are they brought to the Beis HaMikdash? Which that is where they experience the most holiness, is Dav Kali De Keli, specifically in a container. In Keli, Gufe is this and in the container itself, when does it remain connected forever? When it's the cheapest, when it's the simplest material, in something that's not cheaper, that's something that can't be lower than that, because since the spiritual counterpart of Bikurim represents the neshama in a guf, in the lowest of the low, therefore also the Bikurim are the most perfect way of doing so, is bringing it in the cheapest of all vessels. Durch dem Eisig in Hilchas Bikurim. Wie das ist in Teira Achas. And as we learn Bikurim, and we learned it today, not just how it is in Halacha, in Nigla Teira, we also now learned what Bikurim is in Pnimiyas HaTeira. So we learned it in one unifying way. When in dem Zman was men lernt und men lehnt das in Teira. Das ist echt der Zman von Avos Bikurim the time that we're reading it in the Torah is also the time when the Bikurim was actually brought, because it had to be brought between Shavuos and Sukkos, and Parshas Kisavoy is always between Shavuos and Sukkos. So we hasten the fulfillment of the bracha, that not just that it'll be next year, but it'll be right away. And when it's right away, then it happens automatically in the next year. if I wasn't clear about that, there's a very famous vart in the Haggadah that L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Yerushalayim. It doesn't mean that we have to wait until next year. We could be in Yerushalayim now, and automatically we'll be in Yerushalayim next year. So too, it says that by the Bikurim, the bracha was Tishna L'Shana Haba. You should be able to bring it again next year. The pshat is not to wait for next year to bring Bikurim, but we should go right away to Eretz Yisrael, and automatically we'll be in Eretz Yisrael next year for the next Bikurim. Havas Bikurim B'Pashto, so that the next year we'll be able to bring Bikurim literally in the base of English Ashlishi. Sheyibana b'Meheira v'Yamin al Mashiach Tzedkenu v'Samachta b'Chol Hatev. You should be able to rejoice with all the goodness that Hashem has given you. V'Simchas Elam al Reisham, and the eternal joy upon their heads.